Welcome, friends, to another edition of Economic Update, a weekly program devoted to the economic dimensions of our lives and those of our children. I'm your host, Richard Wolff. I want to begin with the announcement that we welcome and appreciate those of you who write in to Charlie Fabian, our volunteer who works with us to collect and to transmit suggestions, ideas, questions, comments that you may have about the program and about ways to make it better serve your interests. And as usual, you know his address, but I'll repeat it: charlie.info438@gmail.com. Later in the program, I'll have something to say again about our new book, Understanding Capitalism, that is available as a special part of our fundraising. But let me get into today's program. We're taking advantage of the fact that we are at that period of time when one year passes and a new one is welcomed into our lives, or we into it. And I wanted to use this moment to do a kind of review of the economy in the year 2024. And I want to give it a title: that the economy is anything but great. And here I'm obviously pushing back against those who want to believe, oh, they want to believe it so badly, that our economy is some sort of great economy, in great shape. And they list off things that are good about it. And there are, by the way, good things about it. But I want to balance the story with something you will hardly ever hear. What are the problems? What are the failures? What are the weaknesses? Not because they're the only thing to hear and there aren't any good ones. No, that would be as silly on the negative as mainstream media are on the positive. But I'm not here to be a cheerleader for capitalism. I'm a critic, no question about it. And so I thought it might be interesting for those of you who believe it's great too, to hear what a critic sees when open to and willing to face what's not so good, what's problematic. And you know something? It's as important to face those as to cheerlead if you want to have a clear understanding of what's going on. And if you're smart enough to know, you better fix what isn't working. Here we go. I want to start by talking about the relative decline of the U.S. economy, U.S. capitalism, during 2024. What do I mean by relative decline? That the United States and its major allies, the G7, that's the United States plus Japan, Canada, Britain, France, Germany, and Italy, those 7 countries, the U.S. and its major allies, fell further behind China and its major allies, usually denoted by the word BRICS, BRICS. Okay? What do I mean? Well, I'm going to use the growth rates offered by the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, a major Western institution set up by the G7, that is, by the United States, funded by them, and very much an ally of them. So here are the numbers they come up with. The United States in the year 2024 will grow by 2.8%. All of the other members of the G7 will be growing by less than 2.8%. What will China and India, the 2 major economies in the BRICS, China and its major allies, how will they go according to the IMF? China is scheduled to grow 4.8%. That's nearly double the United States. And India, 7%. That's nearly triple the United States. In other words, the BRICS, China and its allies, will be growing faster, much faster than the United States and its allies. Therefore, the United States, relative to its major competitors, will be declining relative to them. That's important to understand because this relative decline in the year 2024 is similar to the relative decline in most of the previous 35 years that this has been going on. This decline is a major problem for the United States, for which it has found no solution. That's why it's continuing this very year. That has to be faced, whether you're a cheerleader or not. Number two, the biggest single project into which the United States has poured hundreds of billions of dollars this year has been the war in Ukraine, which is being lost. The West, the collective West, led by the United States, is losing that war. Russia, the major force on the other side, has won that war, has gained territory. It now basically occupies a third of what used to be Ukraine, the eastern third, more or less, and his army is moving westward day by relentless day. That's not an economic victory. That's an economic as well as a military defeat. And fighting to the last Ukrainian doesn't change that. Number three, the United States has spent an enormous amount of money and an even greater amount of political capital supporting Israel in its, whatever you want to call it, war in Gaza, added to which we now have the war against Hezbollah in Lebanon and the bombing of Syria during its difficulties these days, and so on. You know what that has accomplished? The isolation of the United States. It has provoked, and in that sense helped cause, the decision of Saudi Arabia, the world's number one source of petroleum, to become part of the BRICS alliance with China. It has therefore enhanced the relative decline of the G7 relative to China and the BRICS that I spoke to you about. It's not a success economically. It's the opposite. Then we have the tariffs. Now, these are epitomized by Mr. Biden's decision to raise the tariff on Chinese electric vehicles to 100%. And I want to go over with you what that means, because that's an economic admission of failure. 15 years ago, automobile companies around the world began working hard on the transition to electric vehicles from gasoline-powered vehicles. They all knew that for reasons of climate, cost, efficiency, this was the wave of the future. That wave could have been, in a rational world, mass transportation, which is much, much better. But that's not possible because of the power of the automobile companies, who are willing to have a transition, but only if they can continue to make and profitably sell individual automobiles. Well, that competition took 15 years and had a clear winner, not the Tesla Corporation, even though that made a billionaire out of Elon Musk, but the BYD Corporation of China. which ended up producing the best quality electric vehicle at the lowest price. If Americans could buy that vehicle at the price the Chinese demand, they could get it for $30,000. That's what more or less the rest of the world pays. And that BYD cars are on the roads everywhere in the world, except here. Why? Because here there's a tariff. Uncle Sam says you can buy that BYD electric vehicle for $30,000, but if you do, there's a tax we Republicans and Democrats put on it. A tariff. That's just the name of the tax. 100%. So if you spend $30,000 to get the Chinese vehicle, you got to give another $30,000, 100%, to Uncle Sam, meaning the cost to you of the car is $60,000, which is why Americans don't buy it, because you can get an electric car from Ford or GM or Tesla for less than $60,000, more than the $30,000 China is ready to sell it to you for. Why? Because your own government taxes you. And why does the government do that? Because Americans would buy BYD cars just like they bought VWs and Hondas and Toyotas in years gone by. Americans are not loyal to Ford and Chevy, to GM, not if it costs them thousands. Will we be loyal to the United States government? All it's doing is protecting. It's protecting the jobs and the profits of Ford and GM. That's what this is about. And that's all it's about. And if you think, well, that's nice, we're protecting those workers. Yeah, that is nice. That's the nice part. But if you think that's all that's going on, let me explain. A competitor of the United States making anything you want, shirts, pants, ice cream cones, it doesn't matter. Around the world, that competitor can buy the trucks and cars they need at $30,000, best quality electric. Their American competitors can't do that. They'd have to pay $60,000. So they end up paying $40,000 or $50,000 to an American or a Japanese producer. You know what they do? They pass on the extra cost. And the people using the Chinese vehicles can offer to compete at a lower cost. So the world, including Americans, will buy the competitor's product, not the Americans, and that will lose us jobs in all the other industries. Will we lose more in the other than we protect in the auto? We don't know that yet. But to present this all as I'm protecting American jobs is nonsense. It relies on your not understanding what I've just explained, which is hardly rocket science. You deny the Americans the cheap, efficient vehicles that all of America's competitors around the world can and do buy, and that will hurt the American economy, first and foremost, the jobs of American workers. The profits of GM and Ford will be protected. The jobs of the American worker will not. That's a story of class struggle, friends. You don't use that concept, you're not familiar with it. And the answer is yes, you are, if you think about it. Stay with us. Our list of the problems of the so-called great economy will resume right after the break. Welcome back, friends, to the second half of today's economic update. Before jumping in and continuing our story of the problems of the U.S. economy in 2024, I want to let you know about a fact regarding our recently published new book, Understanding Capitalism. It is now available in a limited edition, hardcover, linen-wrapped special that we're making part of our end of the year fundraising effort. If having such a copy, signed and autographed by me personally to you, is of interest, we ask please send us an email at info@democracyatwork.info. Let us know you're interested, and we will immediately email you back with the details of how you can acquire one or more of these limited edition hardcover signed and autographed copies. Okay, moving along, I want to turn next to something that you might not think of as part of our economy, but it is an incredibly accurate measure of our economy. And what it gives us is a measure that says, here's a problem. I'm referring to the effort led by the Republicans, but unfortunately seconded by the Democrats, to demonize immigrants, to treat immigrants into this country as scapegoats, people you can blame for the problems of our economy, even though that makes no sense. As I have repeated, we are a nation, a wealthy nation of 330 million people. Undocumented immigrants now number between 10 and 12 million people, and they are among the poorest people in the country. 10 to 12 million poor people do not have the power, the influence to significantly cause anything in a rich economy of 330 million people. They are too few and they are too poor to do that. But put that aside. Here's a bit of history that'll show you what immigration or anti-immigration tells us about our economy. It tells us our economy is weak. What do I mean? When an economy is strong, and by that I mean it employs people, it's growing, it is in great shape, it absorbs immigrants. That's what America did when it was great. In the 19th century, particularly after the Civil War, when it grew fast. Again, in much of the 20th century, when it grew fast. It could and did welcome immigrants. They were one more part of the American labor force, thereby able in a growing economy to produce not only enough output to take care of their own wages and salaries, but enough to provide a profit to enterprises who could plow it back into their businesses, etc. Welcoming immigrants is a sign of economic health. Excluding immigrants, and worst of all, deporting immigrants, is a sign of economic weakness, inability to absorb. It's not the road to making America great again. It's the road in the opposite direction. It's an admission that the economy is in trouble and shows no prospects of getting better. Because if it did, then the immigrants wouldn't be a problem. They'd be absorbed now as they were so many times in this country's past. You don't want to face that dimension of immigrants? Fine. But then don't claim to be understanding or analyzing. You just want to cheer, regardless of what the reality suggests. Then we see recently corporations, led by Walmart, deciding no longer to be concerned about the climate, to take the climate into consideration, to be no longer concerned about DEI, diversity, equality, inclusion in its hiring, in its operations. You know why they're not doing those things? Oh, they'll tell you, we're adjusting to the conservatives in our business. The reason you did that the last 5 years is not because you didn't care about conservatives in your business. You did it because you knew the whole society overwhelmingly supported it. And now that your profits are squeezed because of the relative decline of the U.S. economy, you don't want to waste any money on anything that isn't about making profits. So that's why you're doing that. Not a sign of economic well-being, a sign of desperation. And then we have more obvious things, right? You are all aware that for the last 3 or 4 years, we have a greater degree of labor militancy than we have seen in this country for many decades. Workers everywhere, Amazon, Starbucks, United Auto Workers, UPS. The last few years have seen large and small drives to unionize, strikes, to win contracts, to demand better wages and working conditions. In 2024, we had the strike at Boeing. Not only was the strike successful, when the company finally caved in and gave a decent contract, the workers said, no, you got to do better than that because you forced us out on strike. And we lost pay over the strike, so we want a better contract. They gave them a second one. They turned that down, too. They had to come up with third contract, better than the previous two, before the workers agreed to it. That's a sign of labor militants. But you know why the workers are militant? Because the economy isn't working well for them. They're angry about the inflation. They're angry about the job situation. They're angry at what they see around them, and they're determined to fight. That's a sign of an economy with problems. Problems that lead people to do what? To go on strike. Every worker, for those of you who don't know, doesn't want to strike. A strike is when you don't get paid. Oh, yes, a few unions have what they call a strike fund, but it pays you much less than your regular job pays you. And then there are the companies that take away your health insurance while you're on strike, who change the job around while you're on strike. The workers don't want that. That is an action done when the company fails to be able to live up to what workers have been led to expect and have every right to. It's not a sign of strength. It's a sign of weakness. The people of America, the polling, it sort of changed in 2010. Before that, the public support for unions had been shrinking for 40 or 50 years. The last 15 years been growing. A clear, big majority of Americans support unions. You know why? Because they're frightened by where the economy is going. The dollar doesn't buy for them what they need. They don't get enough of those dollars for what they need. And they see the union correctly as one of the few mechanisms that might be available to help them. It's a sign that the economy isn't doing well, that workers resort to unions and strikes, which they didn't think before they needed so much. And then there's the rise of violence. The United States is an extraordinarily violent society. One manifestation, the assassination of that United Healthcare CEO. But the violence in our streets, the police killings, particularly of Black and brown people, the incarceration in our prisons of especially large numbers of, Black and brown people. This is a sign that there aren't the jobs at the incomes that people need and want to live with. They don't want to have to do dangerous criminal acts. They don't want to engage in violence or suffer it. Don't put them in that position, and they won't do that. In an economy that can't give them the job and the income they've expected, they've gone to school for, is a job that's provoking them. And violence is so much a part of the American self-image that if you put a squeeze on your people, you get a lot of violence. Other cultures are different, but not this one. It's not a sign of economic health. Crime is always a sign of economic problems and troubles. And to pretend otherwise is just to do that, pretend. I could go on, but I want to leave time for the conclusion. An important recent report did a simple study. It said, how much have the benefits of Social Security gone up since the year 2010? And the answer is 58%. 58%. How much did the costs of the basic goods purchased by retired persons go up in the last 15 years? The answer here, 73%. And if you take two examples, bread and chopped hamburger meat, they both went up more than 73%. In other words, our economy, faced with a rapidly growing number of relatively older folks, 65 and older, has given them a Social Security that does not enable them to keep up with the level of spending that Social Security recipients had in 2010, 15 years ago. That's not the sign of a healthy economy. A healthy economy, a great economy, doesn't squeeze the tens of millions of elderly Americans after they've given a lifetime of work. All right. There are strengths of the American economy, no question. You hear about them all the time, particularly from whoever's in power, the CEO at the corporation or the politician in office. And most of those strengths, if you look at them honestly, are legacy. In other words, they're the things that worked well in the economy in the past that we still have. We still have a lot of roads. We still have a lot of high tech. We were good at that once, the best ones. But what's growing are the problems, the failures, the weaknesses. We don't have a great economy. We keep being told that, but that's just an advertisement. You know better than to believe the advertisement for the soap you buy. You need to learn to be equally skeptical about the statements of our great economy because they have the same truth value as the advertisement for the soap. Thank you for your attention. I look forward not only to speaking with you next week, but to the whole forthcoming new year. And I wish you the very best in that new year as well. Thank you.